we've had some unexpected debate results. Perhaps the most memorable one took place in Panama several years ago, where the Minister of Education became very upset by our report card and took out advertisements in the national press criticizing us and saying this report card is no good and so on and so forth, and didn't like it at all. And then turned around and produced their own report card. Ours was titled, "It's Time to Act." So they produced a document about 3 or 4 months later and sent it to us that said, "We are acting." Their criticism of our report card had no real substance because the report card was well done. It was solid. It was defensible. They didn't like it. Okay, that's understandable because it said some things that were critical about the Panamanian education system, but these were truths. And, this was a well-done report card, so it wasn't a problem. I'm sure that Minister Holness would not react that way, even to criticism, but you never know what's going to happen when you put something like this out into the general public. We had another case which was quite interesting. We produced a couple of Central America-wide report cards covering all of the countries of Central America. And in one of those, the person who was from El Salvador, who was the key person in putting all this together, traveling all of the countries, gathering the data, so on and so forth, a couple of years later was named Minister of Education of El Salvador. And so all of that familiarity, all of that analysis that she got out of doing the report card informed what she did as Minister of Education, and she says that very clearly. So there's a kind of process here over time, or potential for a process that producing these report cards can have, and bears mentioning. We've had some other cases in the Dominican Republic, for example, where the National Business Council, CONEP, took the key recommendations from our Dominican Republic report card and made them their own and put them in these 4 recommendations. They said, this is our position vis-a-vis education reform in the Dominican Republic. And we find that that happens with some regularity, because if you do a solid report card, if it's based on good data, if it's good analysis, if these are good recommendations, people will use them. People will just say, okay, I don't have to go to all the work to figure this out. These guys have done it. It's good stuff. We'll just use it. And they begin to use it in different fora. And again, you can't predict that. You can't guarantee it. But it is a real possibility when you produce these things. Why have the report cards been successful? I think it's important to understand this. They have been, and they must be, technically solid. They've got to use the best data. They have to apply the best analysis. They have to draw the most interesting and useful policy recommendations from that analysis. If you do that, it's very hard for people who are made uncomfortable by the report card to criticize what you do, because you've done a good job. Reasonable people will agree. This is a good analysis. So you set yourself up into a nice situation. You need to do that if you're going to be successful. Secondly, the report cards are short, relatively short. They are very clear. They are non-technical. They're not written in academic language. We often have a journalist go over the text before we publish it, so it gets into, I'm sure, the gleaner's kind of language in the case of Jamaica. They emphasize graphs and simple graphs that quickly tell a visual story that people can get right away. You don't have to work at it. So you can show this to somebody who's in a hurry, who's very busy, who can't read a longer document, and they'll see that that line goes down or that line goes up or whatever it is. They'll get it right away. It's important to do that. Moreover, our report cards tend to limit the topics that they take on. They tend to focus on just a few issues, 4, 5 areas, whatever. Because people's attention spans mine at least, aren't all that big. You know, you have to have just a few things you take away from a document. So we try to focus on those few things. And they provide the kind of information that decision makers need. And we try, when we prepare a report card, to think about the decision makers. What do they need to know? And that's the kind of information that we try to put up front. So that's our experience with the report cards. I want to then make a few comments about the value-added approach, which we have not done ourselves. We know something about it. We have not actually incorporated it into any of our report cards so far. Nicole made some useful remarks about it, and the document you have talks at some length about the value-added approach. You have to have a fair amount of technical capacity, and you have to invest a fair amount of resources because you've got to test kids at point A and then again at point B so that you can show how much they've learned between those 2 points. And the focus of value-added approaches tends to be on very specific things. And you might have a system where you have real improvement measured by value-added, but the overall system is a mess. And you might miss that if you focus only on value-added. So you have to, it's sort of one part of something, and you need to have those other parts present as well. Latin America is just beginning to experiment with value-added approaches, I would say, to very little effect so far. Chile's been working on this for several years. They still haven't figured out exactly how they're going to do it, although they are convinced that they're going to do it. There's a strong commitment at the ministerial level on doing it. So I think that it's fair to say that the value-added approach is a work in progress. It is the future. That's where people are going to go in education policy and education monitoring. It merits the attention that it's getting. It's something that I would love to see Jamaica figure out. Maybe you have to pilot something first and get experience with it and see what works best. But it certainly is the direction to move in. Thank you very much.